I'm going to look at the camera when I say this. Life is a game. You can change the character that you're playing or the costume that you're wearing at any time. Just because you've been, Ali, the entrepreneur for 10 years doesn't mean you can't become Ali, the fiction writer.
Hi everyone, it's Alex York. I am here with Ali Kriegsman, who made the Under 30 list in 2018 for her work as a co-founder of Bulletin. Today, she is an author, a marketing consultant, and so much more. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ali.
Thank you, Alex. Good to be with you.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I mean, we're freezing, are we not?
We definitely are. So you have been around the block in terms of entrepreneurship, business. Like I said, you made the list in 2018. So much has changed since then.
How many years has that been? I feel like my brain is like
7
broken
at this point,
oh my God,
which is wild. So so much has happened in the past 7 years, I feel. How do you feel like you have fared over the past 7 years?
Good and bad, highs and lows. Let's see. I guess I made the list 2 years before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. It was definitely really intense. And I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs would say this, keeping your cool, continuing to scale your company, keeping your ish together,
Mm-hmm.
keeping yourself in a good leadership mindset through the pandemic was really taxing. Also taking care of yourself and making sure you didn't lose your mind.
Right.
Really proud that I got through that the company got through that. We ultimately sold the business in 2022, so 2 years out from the pandemic, which was really exciting. And after many pivots, which I think you wrote about, right? You published a piece about Bulletin pivoting a zillion times.
You guys have had many, yes.
Finally exiting. The version of the business that we sold was a B2B wholesale marketplace. We still exist. We make it super easy for buyers of different retailers, big and small, like boutiques, apothecaries, gyms, to source inventory for their different retail locations. They can buy inventory directly through our site. It's all drop ship. And then for brands, we are a great resource for increasing your retail distribution. So if you're a D2C brand and you're like, I need to get on shelves, right? You can use Bulletin, among other tools, to get your stuff out there and kind of break off from just selling on your website. So that exit was really powerful for all of us, for the whole team. And then after that, I started working on a fiction book, which I'm sure we'll talk about in due time. And then I started consulting for other brands, which was a really nice mental health break for me, not managing a bunch of people. Anyone I managed, I love you. And that's not saying anything negative, but I think just having a different pace was really refreshing. And continuing to support entrepreneurs and founders, but in this new capacity, has been really wonderful. And I just look at the life I've constructed on the other side of being Forbes 30 under 30 and everything I was doing that year in 2018, and the lessons learned and the way that I've kind of rebuilt and repaced my life after all that. And I'm really happy where things are.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. You have had so many lives in the past couple of years, for sure. Now, as you mentioned, you're coming into a lot of these conversations as an expert in business, someone that's helping other young founders, other business owners grow. But at one point, you were them. You were just starting up Bulletin. I want to talk a little bit about your founding story. You were in a different career before you became a founder. So can you walk me through what kind of those early years of the ideation process behind Bulletin were and how you kind of came up with the idea in the first place?
Yes. And I will try to keep this brief.
You got a whole book about it.
I know.
So all to talk about. So
I know. And I love to yap. So, so when I was 23, I was working at Condé Nast. That was my first job out of school. And they were all about content and commerce. I think Refinery 29 had either just or was about to integrate e-commerce into their shopping experience. And all websites do this now, all editorial sites. It's you're reading an article and it's all affiliate, right? It's you can shop this right now, whether it's a skincare product or fashion. But that was very brand new at the time, which is crazy to think about. And from there, I went to Contently, which was a startup that helped brands basically editorialize themselves. So this was right when Red Bull had created like their magazine. And this was right as like Coca-Cola had started like a really big blog. Like all of these big brands and small brands, beauty brands, were like, we need to think of ourselves more as content creators. And so me and Alana, my co-founder and business partner, at that time, we were just the best salespeople at that company. I think because we both really understood content, we really understood curation. And she had actually come up with the first idea of Bulletin, which was, let's take Etsy and make it more curated and layer in this like editorial storytelling. So we're going to have a Squarespace site and you're going to be like the editor in chief, like super lo-fi, low overhead. Everything was drop ship. So she was just reaching out to like cool brands that she saw at like the Brooklyn flea markets and like stuff that she just was finding on Instagram. And I was like interviewing them and telling their life story. And you would get a news bulletin every other week or so. That's why it was called Bulletin. And you could shop their art or their jewelry or their wallpaper, whatever it was, throughout this like story that I had written about them. And she was really the one that had this bigger vision for the business. Like she was watching Into the Gloss become Glossier. We had both read Girl Boss by Sophia Amoruso, and we were watching these big D2C businesses at the time, like Outdoor Voices and Warby Parker, like just start to gain a lot of momentum. And she was very ambitious, and I feel like her ambition was very infectious for me. And she was like, we're going to raise money. We're going to raise venture capital. And so we didn't. Like we, you know, everyone's like, why
did you try to?
She did. Like she would take meetings and stuff. I was only like editor in chief at that point. And people were like, what the hell is this? Like, we're not giving you money for this. And then we eventually started doing pop-up markets to market this like Squarespace site and this newsletter. And the pop-up markets was the like big aha moment, the first one where we were making like real cash money. We basically would rent out this like massive parking lot in Williamsburg, and now it's been fully developed on, which is like a crazy passage of time as a founder. You're like, this was empty. It was like asphalt on a swamp. And then like you don't go to Williamsburg for a while because of the pandemic, and you come back and you're like, this is a massive apartment complex. Like 5 years have passed. And we would charge like $300 per booth. We'd set everything up in the parking lot. And then we'd have like food trucks and stuff. And it was basically like a copycat, like smorgasbord. It was just like a flea market. And we got into Y Combinator's fellowship program on the heels of that, which isn't their core program. They basically just gave you like $20,000 and were like, let's see if you have a real business idea here. That then spiraled. We got into their core program. We started opening retail stores where brands would pay a flat fee to be in the store. We would take a certain percentage of sales, but it operated business model wise similar to the pop-up markets where it was like rent arbitrage, like how WeWork was or how the Wing was, where it's like, we're going to charge everyone rent on this space, have a slight markup on the rent that we're charging everyone, and then also make incremental sales on the retail that we're doing in store. And through Y Combinator, we got investment, venture capital investment for that model. So if WeWork was getting investment for like co-working as a service, and the Wing was getting investment for co-working as a service, we got investment for retail as a service.
And is that how you positioned it? Not as like a store itself, but as retail as a service in that way?
Yes, exactly. We work for retail was our slogan. You know, in venture, you always need like a this for that.
Yeah,
like
the Uber of
exactly.
whatever. Yeah.
And we raised, I think, $2.2 million. Of course, I know the exact amount, even though this was like a zillion years ago. And that model was really hard to scale. And I think that's why you see companies like the Wing and WeWork kind of failing to scale their models. You know, we had at least the bonus income of the retail sales and taking commission on the retail sales, but it was very difficult. And we had to pivot again. And so we realized that as retailers supporting these brands, the brand discovery process was very broken. You're going to trade shows, showrooms, you're scouring the internet, you're scouring Instagram as a retailer. And then for brands to manage all these multiple retailer accounts, you have to like hire an account manager or an intern. You're sending orders over purchase orders in PDFs over email, or you're using QuickBooks, or you're using Google Drive. Like everything was just, am I allowed to say shit show?
Yeah.
Everything was a shit show. And other models had cropped up, like Etsy wholesale existed, but then they folded it because they were focusing on their core business. Fair Wholesale had just started, which became a direct competitor of ours. Tundra was like starting to come up. And these were businesses that were basically taking the mechanics of discovering brands as a retailer and getting into retailers as a brand and streamlining the entire process. Think of it as like Amazon wholesale.
Yeah. A quick question on that. When you guys were pulling these brands in and, encouraging them to come sell at your, pop-ups or ultimately your stores, were you then also like editorializing them in a way? Were you brand storytelling for them, or was it really just like the rent space?
Yes. So that was basically my role.
Yeah.
It was like running sales of getting brands interested in being in the stores, being in the markets. I ran sales, growth, everything for every iteration of the business until mid 2021 when I hired my replacement for that function, which was one of the best decisions I and the company has ever made. I will 100% attribute our exit to Rachel Krug. Love you. You're brilliant. You're a genius. Thank you for everything you did for us. So the other thing we did in the stores was we ran events in the store. Brands could do events in our retail locations. I also had like a PR function where like I was pitching these brands to like Nylon, Cosmo, Teen Vogue. Like if you were in a Bulletin store, you were getting the benefit of everything I was doing to make Bulletin big. We didn't have our own products for the most part. We had some merch sometimes, but you were basically getting your own little like publicity engine. And so we would do events with brands in the store. They could use the store for free to, do workshops or like meet and greet nights with their customers, just community events of any kind. But then we would also have outside people do events in the store, like influencers, or Comedy Central did a big event for Broad City. Showtime did a big event to launch a show there. And so there was just constant foot traffic getting like pummeled into the store. And that was the promise to the brands. It wasn't just like, oh, get shelf space here. And like, now you have a shelf.
Right.
It was like, you get shelf space, but you also get this marketing engine that we are all building together for you. And also we had this analytics dashboard where brands could log in and see their sales in real time in the store. And we had 3 stores running at once in our peak. So you could be in Nolita and Flatiron and Williamsburg, and you could log in and say, where am I selling the best this week? Where is my audience? What motif is selling the best on my t-shirts? Is it the cherry or the flower or the heart? And brands don't have that. They still don't have that, I think. They don't really have access to real-time analytics when they're selling with these indie retailers. So there's just not a lot of visibility unless you're getting reorders from those retailers around like, what is my customer loving the most? And with that analytics dashboard, in addition to the publicity and marketing engine, in addition to the event space, I think they got so much from Bulletin.
Right. Why did you guys end up selling it and, making the exit?
I think it was a few reasons, candidly. Number one, I don't think I've said this out loud before, I was exhausted. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs hit that breaking point where they're like, I don't know if this business is going to benefit from me continuing to push this boulder up a hill. I can't speak for Alana and I can't speak for the rest of the team. I would never. I personally was exhausted. And so I shared that, with the core decision makers on my team, between COVID and just my overall mental health at that time for other reasons, building and pivoting as many times as we did, running a retail concept like that, and then building a 2-sided marketplace and suddenly becoming an engineering organization, hiring an engineering team, developing a product function within your organization. Like, it was a lot of hard work, Alex. Like, it's not like an easy thing. You're not like, oh, we're a retail store that suddenly sells other products, but now we're going to sell our products. It's a completely different transition. And I was spent. So that's one. I think two, I personally saw the writing on the wall. Like the market had gotten very competitive in the midst of our, biggest growth period. We were growing 25% month over month as these acquisition conversations started happening. We weren't like a beleaguered business by any means, but our biggest competitor had just raised $400 million.
And who was that at the time?
Fair. They're still the market leader. And like, God bless them. Like, they're brilliant. I loved building in their shadow because it taught me what it meant to build product discipline, what it meant to build this like truly market defying technology and marketplace that like really did transform how these buyers and sellers interacted with each other. But I was just like, they're going to win. They're going to fucking win. And sometimes it just takes that real hard look to be like, is anyone going to give us the resources to really compete here? And given my experience in venture capital as a woman, as a non-technical founder, again, just speaking for myself, I am not speaking for anyone else on the team. My bet was, I don't think that anyone's going to give us those resources. So that was the second thing. And I think the third thing is once you answer that question, you're like, okay, so where do we go from here, right? And you have to ask yourself, well, what could Bulletin become? And Bulletin was always so community driven. Like our brands knew each other and supported each other, and we supported them. And when we did events, people showed up. I mean, we were an IRL business starting in 2015. We were doing these pop-up markets. And so Alana and I were very excited about the prospect of making Bulletin an IRL, in-person, community-driven business again. We weren't that anymore. As soon as we became the B2B wholesale marketplace, the team was remote because of COVID. Everything was online through this marketplace, and the stores were gone. And with Emerald and New York Now, the show that they also gave to us and kind of gave us creative and strategic control over, we could really resurrect that part of Bulletin, which was always the heart of Bulletin. So post-acquisition, Bulletin became its own brand within the trade show ecosystem at Emerald. We took New York Now over and really rejuvenated it post-pandemic and injected our like sense of community and our love for small business and entrepreneurship into that show after those customers, those brands had been so beleaguered by the pandemic. And it just felt like a way to like get back to our roots. And so I think a lot of times with selling or like figuring out like, what the hell am I supposed to do here? Sometimes the answer is like, you just have to be really honest with yourself and really realistic when you're looking at the market and what's available to you and who's going to help you do what. And then you have to be like, what is the most authentic expression of this brand and who allows us to do that?
Yeah.
And, follow the answers that come from that question.
Definitely. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, founders, the exit is like the end goal, something that's like maybe far in the future, something that they're working towards for so many years. Once you achieve that, and then like you said, you decided you want to go in a more creative route with writing, and you ultimately ended up writing a nonfiction book as well. Did you feel like you were like starting from zero again, or what were how did you wrap your head around like achieving this massive success of selling a company that you'd built and then deciding what was next in, still a very young age?
The exit was very meaningful to me. I still find it very meaningful because to start a business when you're 24 and go through the number of pivots that we went through. And as I said, I literally joke, I'm like, I pulled a two-sided marketplace out of my ass. Like that's how it feels when it's happening. Like you can look at the results, like you can see it from the outside and be like, oh, like the website's so beautiful, it's merchandised so beautifully. Like, I was very successful in getting brands to join and in getting retailers to join. It's not as big as our competitors, but also a lot of the companies that started, like, if you're not fair, you're dead. Abound, done. Tundra, done. Like, every other company that came up with us that was competing with them shut down. We not only survived, we sold. And I think of it less as like, oh, this like financial gain for myself or the story. It showed me who I was. And that is the most precious thing for me. And it also showed me who Alana was. And it's a very, very validating story of like, wow, I was 24 and I partnered up with this brilliant, amazing woman who I trusted with my career in my 20s. And she crushed it. Like, that was just such a good call on my part. And I'm so proud of everything we did together. And then there's the other side of it that you're saying, where you're like, wow, will I ever do anything like that again?
Did you feel that pressure ever?
I don't feel it as pressure. I feel it as like, okay, I did that. That was crazy. Like, that was crazy. Like, it's kind of like that. And it gives you this freedom of like, wow, I'm crazy. I can do crazy stuff. Like, what crazy thing do I want to do next? And I think if anything, what it does is it gives you this weight of like, wow, people perceive me as this successful person that did this like impossible thing, like Forbes 30 under 30, like, Fast Company this, like press that, like exit, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I didn't sell my fiction book, for example, which I worked so hard on and which is really good. Sorry, it's really good. And when it didn't sell, I was like, wow, like that's embarrassing. Like, like I'm a flop, I'm a loser, like I've lost that magic spark, whatever. Like, you kind of get down on yourself a little easier. But then the thing that happened after is that voice that's like, no, girl, you're a magician. You're crazy. Look at this crazy stuff you've done. So it's more of a conversation with yourself that ping pongs back and forth more so than it is like, oh, I did that. I'm on top of the world. I'm perfect. Like, I'm always going to be successful. Or like, oh no, I did this successful thing when I was so young. I'm never going to do anything successful ever again. It's like, it's actually both things talking to each other all the time.
I think that totally makes sense. And I think a lot of like young creatives, founders or otherwise, like once you do one of your things, there's still more creativity flowing and more that, you are either excited about or that you want to pursue. One of the things that you pursued was writing a nonfiction book.
Yes.
Why did you decide to write that?
My first book.
Yes.
So I actually didn't decide to write it. Bulletin was in the New York Times in 2017. And the headline was like, feminist flea market opens in Nolita or something. And I was like, number one, this isn't a flea market. Number two, like, what is a feminist flea market? But whatever, it was the New York Times. So like, what are you going to do? And a literary agent, my first literary agent, one of two, Elias, saw it and reached out to me and was like, I think this story is really compelling. Like, I think you have a book in you or something like that. And him and my other agent at the time, Becky, took me out to lunch and they were like, female entrepreneurship is like really growing. It seems like you'll have a really interesting voice and take on this. And then they kind of gave me an assignment. They were like, if you were to write a book about this, like, what would you write? And I was like, okay. And I had wanted to be a writer since I was 6. I'm a writer. That's like how I identify. Like, I can do entrepreneurship, I can do marketing consulting, but like, on my deathbed, if someone was like, and what were you? I would be like, a writer, And I was just like, okay, I just felt like the version of entrepreneurship that women specifically were being fed at the time was very glamorized. It was very like picture perfect Instagram square. And it was very driven by media that was kind of fetishizing this like glamorous, beautiful, she can do it all, female founder. But the lived experience was not that. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. like I'm messing up all the time. Like I'm disappointing myself. I'm sometimes disappointing my team. I'm like spending money I shouldn't have spent. I'm making mistakes. And I wake up sometimes and I'm like, I don't deserve this. And I go to bed sometimes and I feel like I'm a genius. And it's this very volatile experience. And I felt like because the realities of the experience weren't being talked about or portrayed, when women were running into roadblocks, I would hear it all the time from my friends and from the literal founders selling in my store. They felt like they were absolute like failure gremlins. Like they were like, something's wrong with me. And I was like, I need to write a book that really talks about entrepreneurship from the trenches, that delves into the psychological side and the emotional side, and isn't written on high after the fact.
Right.
Like Girl Boss, I love Sophia Amoruso. She's continues to be so inspirational to me. She doesn't care what people think. She's on her own journey. She just sold her house and just like moved to London because she was like, I don't care, whatever. Like I love people like that. But she wrote that book after Girl Boss was like a multi-million dollar business. Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg, another book that was put out like in the years leading up to my book, another like very, very wealthy woman like telling us all what to do. And I was like, I'm going to write the rat girl, scrappy, like don't know what I'm doing version of this. And what I hear now from people is the fact that I sold the business actually makes the book even more powerful, because you're like, wait, that's me. I also don't know what I'm doing. I also have all this self-doubt. I also just like hired the first person and they were the wrong person. I also like, bled like my savings on this thing that was the wrong thing. And then they're like, but she did that too.
And she still exited.
And she still made it. And that was the motivation behind my book. I think a big part of my life, for whatever reason, is like I want people to feel like acceptance and like it's all going to be okay. And I try to take away this like negative self-talk and this self-judgment from people. And I wanted to write a business book that was very practical and educational, but like made you feel more confident in yourself, with the realities of entrepreneurship being laid bare, versus reading a book that made you feel like, oh, I'm not doing this and I'm not doing this and I'm not doing this and I'm not enough.
Yeah. You then also, throughout all of this, have gone on to consult other companies, and you've built a pretty significant consulting practice for yourself, probably sharing a lot of those bits of advice that you wrote about now with your clients. What are some of the biggest issues that founders run into, or some of the, just biggest challenges or things that you are trying to help people deal with on a day-to-day basis from the consultant point of view?
I think one of the biggest psychological things I see, or mental things I see, and I write about this in my nonfiction book, is people not realizing that they really need to be like loud and proud about everything that they're doing. There's this sense of insecurity or just perfectionism that leads people to not post about their business on their own social media or on LinkedIn, or send the email or want to make the connection. And I tell the founders I work with all the time, like, you need to be your biggest fan and you need to take this insanely seriously, or like other people aren't going to take you seriously. So that's one.
And is that through social media that you primarily encourage people to do stuff like that?
It's through social media, but it's also just like feeling like you deserve to connect with like people that are elevated and at the top of their craft, and asking for introductions, asking for help, asking for them to be advisors, whatever it is. The second thing I would say is kind of just foundational brand story. Like, why does this matter stuff? Like, the market is oversaturated with everything: clothes, skincare, makeup. Like, if you're launching in an oversaturated category, you need to do the foundational work of like, why are your ingredients special? Why is the science behind what you're making special? Why is the materiality different? Why are you the right person to be doing this? And so that's a lot of the work that I love, like story architecting, crafting like a larger pitch for why the world and why creators, why influencers, why customers are going to care about what you're bringing to market.
How do you see the difference between building like a personal brand versus a business brand? Because I think a lot of people, like you said, maybe are sharing their business on their personal social media accounts or vice versa. How do you see the two going hand in hand today?
I think it's essential. And I wish I didn't feel that way. I don't know. I go back and forth. I'm like, it's essential. I'm like, never mind. I'm not sure. I think that it can only help you. I think if you have a strong personal brand that is confident and interconnected with the values of the brand you're launching, it's only going to help your brand become bigger and more successful. If you don't want to be public in that way, that's totally fine. And I can give examples of brands that have founders that don't do that. But then you need to invest a lot in other people acting as ambassadors for the values that your brand is bringing to the table. Maybe it's not you, but then you kind of need an army of like creators and influencers that aren't just one-off like, thank you for sending this to me. I like it. But it's like, who are the recurring faces and people, whether it's your employees or certain creators that you're paying on a monthly basis to tell the story of your brand to their audience and to your audience every month in place of you being that person. But I just don't think brands can get away anymore with like having faceless brands. Like we want to connect with people.
Do you think that the social media influencer bubble is going to pop at any point? I feel like a lot of, especially young consumers today, are kind of like over putting influencers on pedestals or just following the products that they
I think it's popping.
And so what's next?
I think that people that are like interesting and experts and multi-hyphenates are like the next thing. Like all the brands I'm working with, I'm obviously like leading them to water, but I don't even really need to because they're like, oh, I'm doing a launch dinner, but I don't want like archetypal influencer person there that's like hawking 5 brands on their stories in a day. I want like so-and-so who's like a DJ and a poet and like works at MoMA during the day. Like even if they're just like administrative there, but they have these cool side hustles. Like I want that person with like 7,200 Instagram followers and 10,000 TikTok followers like at my dinner, and then like multiply that person by 15. Like I think that there's a larger movement toward who actually represents the customer that is going to be shopping my product versus like who has the most followers and is the loudest person in the room.
And brands are on board with that as well. They're understanding the push.
They're saying it to me. Like it's kind of a mutual agreement.
And then how are consumers reacting to that? Have you seen that move sales with the customer or clients that you're working with? Or what's been like the biggest push to really get people, like you said, in such saturated industries today, what's making people buy?
It's kind of doing what I just said, but in high volume. So if let's say your product like really makes sense for the, you know, Midwestern college girly that's wearing Uggs and using like a Stanley Cup or something like that. I'm just pulling something out of thin air. And she's using like an e.l.f. lip gloss and like investing in Rhode when like she gets, you know, some extra babysitting money in like that she babysits on the weekend in college. Like you have to get very specific about like who's your customer. It's not just working with like 15 of her a month on TikTok. It's like 150. It's like figure out who your customer is and then figure out in super high volume, how do you get someone that really, really represents that customer in a high volume way, talking about your brand on Instagram and TikTok in an organic way. On a monthly basis. And then I also think like Reddit, like I think really hyper specialized communities that do deep dives and are hyper passionate about certain categories, whether it's like mid-size or plus size apparel that is also sustainable or swimwear or, you know, skincare for hypersensitive skin for women that used to be on Accutane. It's like, people are going to Reddit threads more and more to figure out like what makes sense for me. I want to hear about it from someone that's in my exact identical position. So I think that lateral community trust and agreement is like motivating sales for sure.
How do you see in-person community impacting how brands are building today? You mentioned, you know, when you guys were building Bulletin, that was kind of what you felt the core of the business was. Bulletin aside, like in today's businesses, how important are those like IRL experiences, do you think?
I think very important once you have almost like minimum viable community established, because I think until you have that established through digital channels or just digital fandom, I don't know what like the number would be or what the marker of that would be. Events can be expensive and time consuming, and like they're good at like showing and making it seem like you have community, but I think they only work if you're like getting your actual community together to like deepen loyalty and then showcase on social and through word of mouth that like the customer that like looks like this and likes these things like is attached to this brand. So like you should like it and attach to. So I think it works if you have kind of a baseline of fandom, but if you're like a net new brand that's just kind of coming into the market or cresting into market, it could be too expensive and time consuming of an investment to see it pay off.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Having had experience in the consumer space for most of your career, if not all of your career, what has been the biggest change in how brands are interacting with customers or what customers are engaging with over those past, 7, like we said, years?
What I love is that like brands now, it's like you have to have personality. And I love that. Like, I think that brands now need to feel a little bit like people. It's like Duolingo, I think, is such a good example where it's like you're replying to everything. You're replying in the brand voice. Like everything you post, it feels like it's coming from that archetypal person we just mentioned. It's like the customer is the brand in a way and sounds like the brand, and the brand sounds like the customer. And so I think that expectation of like every caption, every moment of engagement, every reply, everything is so personality driven. I think that's been a really big shift. And I think this era of like blanding, as they call it, and like kind of being really like PC and safe and careful. I don't know. I feel like that's coming to a close, in Gen Z, especially, whatever, just the consumer in general is craving a lot of realness and authenticity.
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk about your most recent pivot as well. You, like we said, have built many businesses, helped other people build their own businesses, but you at heart are a writer.
Yes.
Can you let me know a little bit about your upcoming fiction book and your experience kind of pivoting from this, in a lot of ways, like a hardcore business background now into more of a creative side of things?
Yes. Well, it's interesting because the first phase of writing is always very creative, but then the second phase of bringing it to market does require hardcore business skills for any writer. And I think that's a big chunk of it that's not often talked about. So I came up with the idea for The Raise, my fiction book, while I was still at Bulletin. I was very overwhelmed by the demands of the business. And I felt like it was like just pulling me apart at the seams. And I know I'm very blessed and privileged to have raised money and built my own business and built my own team. And I just want to call that out because I don't take any of that for granted. That said, it also does wear on you.
Totally.
And sometimes you can feel like a victim of your own choices. And that was the mindset I was in when The Raise came to me. I was like, oh my God, what if like something happened to Alana and I had to like run this business all by myself? And that's where the germ of the idea came from. And building out the plot and architecting it and figuring out the twists and the turns, like it's a formula, it's a science. And, I hired a book coach for the first 3 months to help me figure it out. And it was just like the most fun I've ever had doing anything. And that transition was just such a nice break for my brain, like leaving Emerald and dedicating some time to, just focusing on that and zoning in on that was wonderful. And ultimately, I got incredible agents at CAA. Like I was like, I'm going to get my favorite author's agent, Patricia Lockwood's agent. And I did it because that's the business side of me. I'm like, I'm gonna get it. We weren't able to sell the book, unfortunately. And I think it's the confluence of a bunch of different factors. It's not their fault. It's not my fault. Well, it's kind of my fault. Whatever. Editors sometimes just don't get it. And it took me a year to really get over that depression. And then I was like, I'm going to self-publish this book. Like I have this asset here and why would I let it wither away? All the editors loved it. They just didn't know how to market it. And I was like, I'm a marketer.
Right.
So that's my focus this year. And that's where the business side comes in. I mean, even when you're with a traditional publisher, you have to market your own book. You have to spend your own money marketing your own book. No one's going to do it for you. And no one talks about that. You have to get it publicity. You have to get people promoting it. You have to make people want to read it. And if you don't put the work in, no one's going to find it.
Yeah.
And so I'm super excited. I'm going to publish it in September. And hopefully by the time this comes out, my announcement about all of this should be live.
Last question for you, knowing that one, this is our audience for under 30 projects are young, ambitious people who might be in a hardcore business realm, might be in the creative realm. As you have made these pivots in your own career and are finding more footing in the creative side of things now, going down a path that you have wanted to for so many years, I think a lot of young people, despite still being young and in their early careers, feel so stuck in maybe a path that they've set on, or something that they have done for the first couple of years of their career. How do you think about making pivots in your life to achieve whatever it is you want next? What are those things that people can either see as like a beacon that they can follow, or things that they can keep in mind to feel confident in making those pivots like you have?
I'm going to look at the camera when I say this. Life is a game. You can change the character that you're playing or the costume that you're wearing at any time. Just because you've been, Ali, the entrepreneur, for 10 years doesn't mean you can't become Ali, the fiction writer. Mm-hmm. Just because you've been Alex, the illustrious journalist, doesn't mean you can't become Alex, the programmer. And I think that so many people, regardless of what generation they're in, they have this psychological block of not wanting to go backwards, and of not wanting to be cringe, and of not wanting to seem embarrassing, and of not wanting to fail. And I felt all of that. But at the end of the day, number one, no one is thinking about you as much as you think they are. Yeah. So get over yourself. Number two, your life is so precious. It is so precious, and you only have one of them. And if you're spending your day holding yourself back from who you want to be, or working on the thing that you're working on because of all these things I just said, because of how you're perceived, or not wanting to be cringe or whatever, like, come on, like, let's get over it, And I think the third thing is, like, you're just going to feel so yummy and juicy and relieved and less stressed once you take the step in the direction of the life you actually want to be living. Like, the way you want to feel on the inside, the relief you want to feel, is actually on the other side of just like 5 baby steps toward the version of you that you want to be. So those are my parting words.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was so fun to talk about your whole career journey, and I'm so excited to see all that's next for you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Forbes.